Asylum Inc. presents The Doctor's Findings. The Porcelain Mouth. The antiseptic tang still clung to her nostrils when consciousness crept back like a tide of broken glass. Rachel's eyes opened to the familiar acoustic tiles of the recovery ward, their pocked surface swimming in and out of focus as anesthesia loosened its grip. Her tongue moved instinctively to probe the surgical site, expecting the familiar architecture of stitches and swelling. Instead, it met something impossibly smooth, cold, unyielding, like the surface of a dinner plate. Her hand flew to her face, fingers tracing what should have been her mouth. The texture beneath her fingertips defied comprehension. Seamless porcelain stretched from nose to chin, unmarked by any hint of lips or opening. No suture lines, no surgical scars, just an expanse of glossy white ceramic that seemed to pulse with its own subtle warmth. The scream that should have torn from her throat died somewhere in her chest, trapped behind the impossible barrier. Yet even as panic clawed at her ribs, she became aware of something far more disturbing. She could still speak. "The reconstruction went well," came her own voice, floating from somewhere behind the porcelain facade with crystalline clarity. But the words were not hers, and the tone carried an inflection she had never used. Ancient, weary, tinged with something that might have been pity. Rachel's hands pressed harder against the ceramic expanse, searching desperately for some crack, some seam that might explain this violation of physics and flesh. Her reflection caught in the bedside water pitcher showed a face divided. Familiar brown eyes wide with terror above a pristine white void where her mouth should be. The porcelain gleamed with an inner luminescence that seemed to shift and breathe with each racing heartbeat. "Do not be afraid," the voice continued, and now she could feel it, a vibration behind her teeth, below her tongue, somewhere in the hollow spaces of her skull. "I am very old, child, older than your kind's memory. I am what keeps the hungry dark at bay." The words formed without her volition, her vocal cords moving of their own accord, while her actual mouth remained sealed behind its porcelain prison. Rachel tried to speak, to protest, to demand answers, but found herself voiceless, a passenger in her own throat. "Your surgeons believed they were repairing damage," the entity continued through her borrowed voice. "They could not see what truly lurked beneath the broken bone and torn flesh. The gateway was widening, child. The old seals were failing. I came to help, to serve as I have served for millennia upon millennia." Through the recovery ward windows, afternoon light cast long shadows that seemed to writhe and twist against the walls. Rachel's vision began to sharpen beyond normal acuity, revealing details that had no business existing. Microscopic fractures in the paint, the geometric precision of dust motes dancing in sunbeams, and beneath it all, a sense of vast spaces pressing against the boundaries of perception. "You see more clearly now," the voice observed. "The barrier grants clarity, but at a price. You have become a living seal, a guardian between what is and what hungers to be. The porcelain is not mere decoration. It is containment. Ancient ceramic blessed by forgotten gods, fired in kilns that burned when your species still cowered in caves." Rachel's reflection in the picture showed her own eyes, but behind them lurked something else. Shadows that moved independently of any light source. Shapes that suggested geometries no earthly mathematics could describe. The porcelain mouth reflected nothing at all, creating an unsettling void in the center of her face. "There is something beyond," the voice whispered. And now Rachel could hear another sound, a wet, sliding noise like meat dragged across stone, coming from somewhere impossibly distant, yet intimately close. It presses against the boundaries, always seeking, always hungry. It speaks in tongues of madness and feeds on sanity itself. The old words call it many names, but names have power, and power draws attention. The hospital room grew colder despite the afternoon warmth, and Rachel noticed that the shadows cast by the window blinds had begun to move against the natural progression of the sun. They stretched and pooled like spilled ink, reaching toward her bed with deliberate intent. "Do you understand now?" the voice asked. "The surgery opened more than flesh and bone. Your jaw was shattered in that accident, yes, but the fracture ran deeper than your doctors knew. It cracked the ancient barriers, the prehistoric seals that your ancestors carved into the very foundation of reality. Without intervention, without my guardianship, the breach would have widened until something far worse than mere death came crawling through." Rachel tried again to force words past the porcelain seal, to scream for help, for explanation, for an end to this impossible nightmare. But the ceramic remained immutable, and with growing horror, she began to understand the entity's earlier warning. The thing beyond the seal could hear her intentions. Even now, as terror mounted in her chest like steam in a kettle, she could sense something responding to her distress, a presence vast and alien, turning its attention toward the hairline cracks in reality that her fear was creating. The shadows in the room deepened, and the temperature dropped another degree. "Yes," the voice said softly. "It knows you are here now. It tastes your panic like wine upon its tongue. This is why you must not scream, child. This is why you must never scream. Fear is the key that opens doors better left sealed. Terror is the invitation that pierces the veil between worlds." The wet sliding sound grew closer, accompanied now by what might have been breathing, if breathing could sound like wind through a charnel house, like the last gasps of civilizations ground to dust beneath cosmic indifference. Rachel's enhanced vision caught movement in the spaces between shadows, glimpses of something that hurt to perceive directly. "I have held the barrier for so long," the entity continued, and for the first time, she heard exhaustion in its borrowed tone, eons beyond counting. Standing guard while your kind grew from primitives scratching symbols on cave walls to masters of steel and silicon. But even ancient strength has limits. Even the oldest seals can crack under sufficient pressure. The porcelain felt suddenly fragile beneath Rachel's exploring fingers, no thicker than an eggshell between her consciousness and something that should not exist. She could sense the entity's growing weariness, feel the trembling in its otherworldly resolve. "The reconstruction surgery was not coincidence," the voice admitted. "I guided the accident, shaped the circumstances that brought you here. Your bloodline carries the old sensitivities, the genetic echoes of those who once served as guardians in darker ages. You were chosen, child, not randomly, but by necessity. The seal required a willing host, and willingness can be cultivated through desperation." The shadows in the room began to coalesce into shapes that suggested limbs, appendages, things that moved with purpose and hunger. The wet breathing grew louder, punctuated by sounds that might have been words in languages that predated human speech. "It knows," the entity whispered, and now Rachel could hear genuine fear in its borrowed voice. "The old one beyond the seal. It has caught the scent of new opportunity. Your terror calls to it like a beacon in the void. If you break, if you scream, if you let the fear overwhelm the barriers of sanity, then the porcelain will shatter like autumn leaves. And what comes through?" The voice trailed off, but Rachel's enhanced perception filled in the gaps with images that seared themselves into her consciousness. Cities consumed by living darkness, reality itself unraveling like poorly woven cloth. The final screams of a species that had never truly understood the fragility of existence. She understood now why the entity had sealed her mouth, not to trap her voice, but to trap her screams, not to silence her, but to prevent her terror from becoming a key that unlocked doors humanity was never meant to open. The porcelain pulsed once beneath her fingers, warm as living flesh, and Rachel realized that her choice had already been made. She was no longer merely human. She was a guardian, a living seal. a barrier between the hungry dark and everything she had ever loved. In the gathering shadows of the recovery room, something waited with infinite patience for her resolve to crack. She closed her eyes and tried very hard not to be afraid. My dear digitally depraved, allow me to present Porcelain Mouth, a delectable morsel of surgical horror that you've just witnessed. Ask what price we pay for protection from cosmic terrors. You observed our unfortunate Sarah awaken from reconstructive surgery to discover her mouth sealed with ancient porcelain, only to learn she'd become a living barrier against something that hungers in the spaces between reality. You heard that entity speaking through her vocal cords reveal the accident was no accident. She was chosen to serve as guardian against horrors that feed on fear itself, where even a scream could shatter the seals holding back primordial darkness. The exquisite irony you witnessed, dear viewers, is that in our modern age of constant chatter and endless expression, true horror lies not in being silenced, but in discovering that sometimes silence is the only thing standing between civilization and the abyss. How terrifyingly appropriate that salvation should come disguised as disfigurement. If you found yourself stirred, unsettled, or just a bit more wary of shadows, consider offering a like to feed the entity that powers these tales. And should you subscribe, you may yet survive to hear the next whisper from the void.